A small portion of this video is sponsored by Squarespace, the ultimate platform for designing your stunning new website. This is one of Samsung's newest and cheapest phones, the A32 5G, and despite it costing less than $300, it's actually got a heck of a lot of stuff going for it. When it comes to phones that are considered budget or affordable, the most important thing is that they focus on the basics. Like, just ask yourself, what are the key things that you need your phone to do each and every single day? Now, for me personally, I need my phone to be able to take phone calls. Obviously, it's a phone after all. Check emails, maybe watch some videos and scroll social media, definitely take some pictures, and for it to do all of that and still be alive at the end of the day. The A32 5G might not be the fastest smartphone on the market, and it might not turn heads like the Samsung S21 Ultra or the iPhone 12 Pro, but this phone does have 4 or 5 things that it does shockingly well, especially for the price. When I first started to read the spec sheet for this phone, there were 2 things that instantly jumped out at me. The first thing I noticed was that this sub $300 phone actually has a 90Hz high refresh rate display. That's not something you see very often down in the lower echelons of the smartphone market. Flicking through menus and scrolling my Twitter feed feels very smooth, and there were very few frame rate drops while I did most things. The display is able to throttle the refresh rate down to 60Hz when you aren't using the display to save battery life, and then as soon as you start using that display again, it'll instantly shoot back up to 90Hz for that fast and fluid feeling. Nice. Of course, this isn't a flagship tier display or anything. It's got a pretty big chin to it, and there's no hole punch here like a lot of the more expensive Samsung phones. It's just a teardrop notch for the front-facing camera. But it is a good enough display for watching videos on. It's a decent sized display too at 6.5 inches, but you can tell just by looking at it that it isn't all that high-end. It's a TFT LCD panel instead of OLED, so colors aren't that great, and it runs at 720p, so it's not that sharp either. But for less than $300, it's a perfectly fine display, especially since the high refresh rate makes the phone feel much faster on the performance side of things, which, trust me, we'll get into a little later. The other thing that popped out to me on this spec sheet is that this phone has a massive 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and the battery life on this phone is absolutely insane. It's easily a 2-day phone for most people, and if you don't use your phone a whole lot, you could probably even get 3 days out of it, especially if you switch the refresh rate over to 60 Hz. On average, I'm getting about 8 to 9 hours of screen on time, which is higher than almost every phone I've tested in the past. Unfortunately, the A32 5G doesn't come with a whole lot of internal storage, either 64 gigs in the base model or 128 in the highest end configurations, but to offset that, it does come with a micro SD card slot if you need more storage for apps or photos. It also comes with a headphone jack, which is always nice to see in these more budget-friendly phones. Another thing that's nice to see is the inclusion of a fingerprint reader that's mounted inside the power button on the right-hand side of the phone. I gotta be honest with you, I thought this fingerprint reader was gonna be just absolute garbage because of how cheap this phone is, but it's actually surprisingly fast to read my thumb. As the name would imply, the A32 5G also has sub-6 5G support, which could be handy if you live in a more populated area that has full 5G coverage, but I live in rural Canada, so I wasn't able to test that out. The call quality is great though, no complaints whatsoever on that end. The best thing about this phone is the price. The A32 5G retails for $279 US, which is very affordable for a decent phone these days. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. Samsung did have to make quite a few cutbacks to make a phone that's this affordable, and I'll talk about those right after I take a quick minute to thank the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. Squarespace is my go-to website builder, and I've used them many times over the years. It's a fully inclusive platform that comes with everything you need to build a professional website, an online store, a portfolio, or anything else you can think of. They've got an absolute boatload of features, and they make it extremely simple to build a website that looks great and performs well too. Even if you've never built a website in your life, you could use Squarespace easily. They've got search engine optimization tools for ensuring your site gets found on Google, email campaigns for spreading your messages, e-commerce tools for setting up an online store, and a whole bunch of other stuff to get your website up and running. I'm currently working on a website for my Tech Rewind series where I can make blog posts about each and every phone I review, and working with the Squarespace platform has been super easy and a load of fun to play around with. Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/markspurrell to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a custom domain. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this part of the video, and now let's get back to the A32. When you first pick up this phone, you can instantly tell it's almost entirely made of plastic, and for a plastic phone, it's also surprisingly heavy feeling. There's no fit and finish issues here. It does seem relatively well made, it's just not trying to disguise the fact that it's a budget device. This black colorway is called Awesome Black, but I suggest going with one of the other colors as they look a little bit more lively on this relatively plain design. There are 3 cameras as well as a depth sensor on the back of this phone. A 48 megapixel wide angle, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor to help out with those portrait mode shots. For the price of this phone, the cameras are about what I expected. The main camera is decent with good color and a sufficient amount of contrast that can get some decent shots outdoors and some other areas where there's a lot of natural light. It's certainly nowhere near the best I've seen, but this is a budget phone, so it met my expectations. The 8 megapixel ultra wide and the 5 megapixel macro cameras, on the other hand, are just not great. They both lack sharpness, and I ended up discarding most of the photos that I took with them. You're much better off just shooting almost everything with the 48 megapixel main camera. Surprisingly, the 13 megapixel front-facing camera is a lot better than I expected. Front-facing portrait shots actually came out pretty good with minimal edge detection errors and decent colors and sharpness. Okay, now we need to talk about something that's very important to a lot of my tech enthusiast audience: the performance. I put my SIM card into the A32 5G and used this phone daily for just over a week, and what I found was both expected and kind of unexpected at the same time. This phone comes with a MediaTek Dimensity 720G CPU and between 4 and 8 gigs of RAM depending on the model you go for. For those of you that aren't familiar with the name, MediaTek tends to develop cheaper, more cost-effective CPUs that don't have the best performance overall. However, the A32 5G seems to be relatively well optimized. Yes, of course, you're gonna run into the odd hang up or slow down, and it's not gonna be nearly as fast at opening apps or switching between them as a modern flagship, but again, for the price of the phone, it feels pretty speedy. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Samsung chose to put a high refresh rate display on this phone. Even if it isn't actually as fast as the more expensive phones, it feels pretty close, which is a lot more than I can say for some other budget phones that I've tested. There's a few other things that Samsung did to the A32 5G to cut down on costs though. For one, there's no IP rating on this phone whatsoever, meaning if you drop it in water, there's a good chance that you could fry your phone. The A32 5G also lacks some features that are more common on premium Samsung phones, like wireless charging or a set of stereo speakers, but those are things you should probably expect when you buy a brand new phone for $300. I just have one more complaint, and this is something that bothers me with almost all budget phones. The vibration motors that are in this phone are both really loud and really weak at the same time. You're actually more likely to hear the sound of the motors rattling inside when you get a notification than you are to feel it in your pocket. So look, let me put it as simply as I can here. The A32 5G is a phone that nails most of the basics. It's got a huge battery that'll last you a long time, a high refresh rate display that makes the phone feel faster than the average budget phone, 5G support, and it costs less than $300. The cameras aren't stellar and you are missing some features that you'll find on more expensive phones, but overall, it's a decent phone for the price that you pay. If you're still interested in the A32 5G, I'll leave a link for you down in the description down below. And if you like this video, I highly recommend you check out my Tech Rewind series where I review flagship phones from the recent past that you can get right now for a very good price. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day.